welcome to the Chuan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, Qigong, and meditation. This week we continue our discussion on the Wu style of Tai Chi. We begin with a continuing look at the Power of Internal Martial Arts by Bruce Francis, where he talks about the development of the Wu style and specifically about relationships between teachers and students, both before and after the Boxer Rebellion. Then we look at Yueh Liang's book from 1935, which has a lot of the photos of Wu Chuan that you may have seen in posters or in the big gold book. But he talks a little bit about the decision to make that book and then how they decided on which pictures to use and all this stuff. So a little bit of back story on that. And then in our extended episode, we discuss Liu Hongji's Tai Chi a bit, as well as look at T.T. Liang's version of the Tai Chi classic that we discuss Baiwa's version of. And in this week's Patreon episode, we continue our look at the Taoist meditation article with Bruce Francis and comparing the fire and water traditions of Taoist meditation. We discuss the courage that it takes to take on the spiritual journey. And then we continue our discussion of Baiwa's book with the 100-character tablet. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for all your support. Take care of yourselves and be well.
Returning to our discussion of Wu Jianquan's Taiji Chuan, returning to Power of Internal Martial Arts by B.K. Francis, he speaks a little bit more about Wu Jianquan. Wu Jianquan was a prolific teacher who spread his Tai Chi throughout southern China as much or even more than Yang Cheng Fu. For those who do traditional Tai Chi, the Wu style is the second most popular in China, the Yang family and their students having a generation's head start. So going on, he says, in the next generation, Wu's sons changed the form, emphasizing higher stances and less circularity than their father's form, shifting in the manner of Yang Cheng Fu towards a less martial orientation. So he says next that the Wu style has three main branches. Those of Wu's father, Chuan Yu, which is mostly centered in Beijing, which has the least number of adherents. Then there's the students of Wu himself, which is the most prevalent. And then there's those deriving from Wu's sons, the number of practitioners falling somewhere between the other two branches. So that's kind of the three divisions of the Wu style.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's just how many students did you have and how long have you been around, right?
Right. I mean, he taught in the three different places. So, like, there's the Beijing Wu style, basically. Then you could say that the Shanghai Wu style would be his main life teaching took place there, and then there's that Hong Kong, southern China Wu style, where the sons ended up after the war. So it kind of tracks his teaching locations and sort of establishment. Sort of like every teacher who teaches for a long time has the different groups. Like Kumar has sort of the New York students, the Denver students, and the California students, and
or I mean, Chen Manching has that too. He's got his Taiwan,
he has
Malaysia.
China. He started teaching in China, then
like guys like T.T. Liang, and then he goes to Malaysia, and then there's, those guys,
New
and
York,
then he comes to the U.S., and so he's got similar, and at each place the emphasis changed. I mean,
so true. In B.K. Francis' book, he continues talking about traditional martial arts in general here that has a few key points that are similar to what you're talking about. So he describes the traditional father-son, teacher-student relationship and the and Kowtow experience. So he says, before the Boxer Rebellion, people studying one kind of martial art did not learn with people devoted to another martial art. In order to become genuinely trained in a Chinese martial art, a beginning practitioner had to undergo a formal disciple initiation ceremony. During the ceremony, disciples had to take many oaths and kowtow, knocking their heads on the floor, often with significant force, to demonstrate sincerity. The teacher became your surrogate father. You, as disciple, became his surrogate son. The strong Confucian nature of the ceremony powerfully bound you to your teacher and your fellow students, your new martial arts family. Students were not allowed to study outside their systems unless given express permission. Those who disobeyed this dictum were given the silent treatment by colleagues, and a martial family member might even challenge the offender with mutually understood lethal intent. And so he's talking about the early sense of family that the Wu and Yang family had together in those early years of the 1800s and early 20th century, basically before the Boxer Rebellion of 1900, that was the only conditions under which Chinese martial arts was taught.
I mean, I think of it, these guys it was the closest thing we have is gangs.
Yeah, it sounds,
You
or
know,
religions, perhaps.
yeah,
You don't switch gods, like
but
you can't switch
most religions won't beat the shit out of you if you switch.
Right.
And there was a piece of this where it was like, okay, you want to go study with those guys? Well, here's something to remember us by, kind of, and come back when you think when you've got something that we don't have, kind of stuff,
Right.
Because it was a martial culture, but again, that's the kind of stuff that didn't once the boom boom sticks came into existence, that kind of went out the window, because it was like, oh yeah,
right,
I win,
right. And that's what he says in the next paragraph. But just before we jump to that, I was going to say that it was interesting that he describes, you take the ceremonial vow before you start training. So today you thought of discipleship as something that's earned, like you stay with your teacher long enough, you get granted this honor of joining up. But traditionally, day one, you have to bow in. Otherwise, we're not going to show. It's like a gang in that sense. Like you join, then you get to train.
And
it doesn't go the other way.
Right. And one of those things you're banging your head on the floor about is secrecy, is to not tell people that you're part of this group unless you're given permission to tell people that.
And especially not to show what's in the group. Like that's.
Yeah. And it's why some schools, have a big deal about, don't show people what unless they're part of the group.
Right. Yeah. I've been part of schools like that before. It's definitely makes sense, and you don't want to just throw it around, and people don't appreciate it anyways when you show it around like that. So I guess it makes sense to have a somewhat, conservative approach.
I take the position of that, again, in the world we live in, most of the stuff we're doing is not nearly as dangerous as going and buying a AK-47, so it's like, most people that come to a Tai Chi class aren't there to learn how to become lethal weapons,
Right.
Part of what these internal arts do is they force you to confront yourself. And that's the part of it that, it ain't always fun to confront yourself. So
most of us avoid that. So I was going to read this final little bit from the book here. Before the Boxer Rebellion, people of one internal martial arts style normally did not share knowledge with those learning another style. Just as during the Cold War, the American and Russians did not openly share their military technology with each other. The reality of guns took away a good part of the pragmatic need for the separation. Afterwards, teachers began to become more willing to teach those who had studied other styles. The trend began just before the Boxer Rebellion with the Xingyi and Bagua schools, and extended to the Tai Chi schools by the next decade. By the 1920s, the central government had set up national martial arts schools, where many styles were taught under one roof, sometimes by the top people in their respective styles, including Tai Chi's Yang Cheng Fu and Wu Jianchuan. During this time, the internal martial arts began to be practiced increasingly by the more educated members of society, a trend that continues to this day.
Right. And when they first started those organizations, these were the Guoshu Guans, and they had external and internal martial art is both teaching in the same places. And regularly they would get into physical altercation. Like Jien Panling was a big guy, he was a big uppity muckety muck in these groups, and that's why they chose him to be and I think was 36 or whatever, to be the Olympic coach. So this was where they were like, okay, we're all martial artists, we're all Chinese, doesn't matter if you're internal, external, we've all got something we can sort of show off as uniquely special to our own sort of thing. And so national pride became a big part of it. But a thing that got kind of less and less important was the ability to kill people. Right. It was like, that's not so important anymore, because now we have we have troops for that.
I looked on Brennan's translation website. He's got Wu Jianchuan's Taiji, Wu Jianchuan style Taiji boxing for self-study, by Yueh Liang from 1935, published by the Health Magazine Society. And it gives us a few interesting tidbits here. Not a ton, but there's a picture of Wu Jianchuan there that I don't know. It's the same I've seen in other books. He looks pretty. He's a hefty, sturdy guy with a sort of weathered face that just looks like basically a warrior born and bred. I mean, he's got a big square head and a look of piercing eyes and a big shaggy, don't give a damn beard.
Right, and Ma was his son-in-law for those.
His son-in-law Ma is this clean-cut young fellow with the tie.
So Ma marries Wu's eldest daughter,
right,
and
becomes is his wife, right? Ma Yueh Liang begins with the preface. He says, "I have had a long friendship with Wu Jianchuan. When I was young, I was addicted to external styles of boxing arts, practicing for 10 years, and I progressed to be a skilled exponent. But Wu Jianchuan said to me, it is important in training boxing arts to focus on one only. And so if you abandon what you have learned so far and follow me, I will then instruct you in my skill. From then on, I specialized in his Taiji boxing. And after many years of uninterrupted training, I gradually came to understand the subtleties of it. In 1928, he went to Shanghai. The following year, I also went to Shanghai, having been hired to work at the Red Cross Hospital. I also trained with his eldest son. So I just want to stop there in 1928. So I guess Ma Yueh Liang must have started with him during his early days of Beijing. And then in 1928 follows him to Shanghai the next year. So that reflects on what we've been talking about earlier about that movement from Beijing to Shanghai that Wu Jianchuan had done. And here's his student talking about making the trip with him. So then there's a preface by another guy, Chen Zhenmin. I haven't heard of him before. He says, I have practiced martial arts ever since the Jingwu Athletic Association was brought to my attention. So he trained external, he trained internal. And then the Jingwu sent for Wu Jianchuan to head the Wudong department.
Right, so that's code for the internal martial art department, right?
Yeah,
so that's what I was saying. They had these different, it was like college. You have, English department and math department, and the two rarely cross over,
right? And this takes place at the Shanghai Martial Arts Institute. Okay, and so that's not at Jingwu, but at Shanghai Martial Arts Institute. So maybe this is the group that invites him to come from Beijing to Shanghai to teach them and head up the Wudong department.
Could be, yeah.
He says, Wu Jianchuan is a methodical guide and inspires my interest. And he talks about all the stuff he's had to deal with, and decides to switch to publishing health magazines. One day when Wu Jianchuan came to me, I told him about my project publishing on health and requested to make use of photos of him demonstrating Taiji boxing. He happily consented, upon which I made use of the more than 90 photos which have been published in installments in Health magazine, to which I have added explanations. Considering the way the Taiji boxing solo set is always changes and never sits still, it is difficult to describe in writing.
He's right about that.
Damn right. So these must be those pictures that you see of Wu Jianchuan in like the big green poster and in various books. It's a methodical,
yeah. I mean, clearly
photographic breakdown.
There's more than what is usually, I think, included in the books.
Could be more.
Well, because like there's sections of the form where there's no pictures, and then like in later publications they have like just little bits of like, oh, here's a chunk from where it looks like he's a bit older. So
yeah, inserted. And in this book in particular, Ma Yueh Liang fills in with pictures of himself in 1935 to fill out areas where
fill in the gaps.
Wu is missing.
Photos were a lot cheaper in by the time Ma was doing this,
probably
than they were in 1930 or whatever it was.
Right, 1920 something. They're shooting those. So, anyways, he talks about the book. He says, Taiji boxing's place within Chinese martial arts is such common knowledge that I will not bother to waffle on about its breadth and depth. Only to say that this book of just over 100 pages is not capable of recording it all. And then we get to a brief bio of Wu Jianchuan. Wu Jianchuan is from Daxing County, Hebei. In his youth, he learned the Taiji boxing art from his father, Chuan. When he matured, he further devoted himself to studying it, progressing to perfection. In 1914, he was appointed head martial arts instructor to the Palace Bodyguards, as well as instructor to the Beijing Physical Education College. That's interesting, 1914. So clearly he's this is his Beijing period. So that sounds like 1914 starts his teaching career with the palace bodyguards in Beijing and with the college there. And then it leaves for Shanghai later. So, okay. So here it says in 1928, he came south to Shanghai to be appointed director of the Shanghai Martial Arts Institute and head of their Wudong section, as well as instructor in the Jingwu Athletic Association. Now in his 60s, his energy is as robust as that of a young man, and his bearing is so elegant that one would be unaware upon seeing him that he is a martial arts master. So then the final piece is in spring 1935, he founded the Jian Taiji Boxing Society in Shanghai. He is always especially kind to younger students. And for those who work hard, he is a methodical teacher who shares everything he knows. He is a distinguished representative of the martial art world. I think this is cool because it's written while he's still alive.
I believe so, yeah.
So this is present tense talking about Wu Jianchuan, which is, you don't see that too much. Most of the books come after the master's passed away.
Right. So this is still, he's still around doing his thing.
In his 60s now, so he's kicking some ass still. There's a little bit more here. He says, this book talks about how the first books are being published recently. And he mentions here, he says, of the masters who have brought prestige to the internal martial arts in recent years, beyond Sun Ludong should be mentioned Yang Chengfu and Wu Jianchuan, who is presented in this book. Wu learned from his father, Chuan Yu, who learned from Yang Banho, Yang Chengfu's uncle on his father's side. And therefore, the source of his boxing art is the same as Yang Chengfu's, but the solo set he practices is somewhat different. What with Sun Lutong's version being another branch, there are certainly more than a couple versions of Taiji boxing now. These men are distinguished masters of our nation's martial arts. And just like our nation's masters of calligraphy and painting, who started out by imitating someone else's technique, then once they had mastered the skill, had unconsciously created their own styles, such is the case also in martial arts. These men have achieved a depth and perfection that sets a standard with every move they make, which makes ordinary practitioners inevitably feel rather inadequate. This is especially so for their countrymen, who obtained the true teachings, but happened to receive them indirectly. Those teachers deserve their fair shares too.
I like that he makes the point again, he's like, look, the outside of these forms might look different, but we're all basically coming from the same, same source.
Yeah.
Which really sounds like he's like Banho was the dude, man. He's like
Banho was kind of the dude.
He's kind of like, we all come from this, or maybe not all, it's not that they come from, but the common common denominator between all of these branches that seemed to be forming at that time was really Banho's teaching.
Yeah.
Because his younger brother really hadn't started, teaching.
Right. Yeah. And he's the standard bearer at that time. Although he does mention Sun Ludong comes from a different style,
right?
Which is Yang Luchan's kind of school brother, Wu.
Right.
So but just still, a little bit more,
but here. Still of worth, still worth checking out. He says,
Yeah. No, so you can tell he's trying to bring everybody together a little bit. He says, since my organization was founded with the encouraging of physical education as its single solemn purpose, we particularly discussed with Wu Jianchuan about fully photographing his Taiji boxing set to share it with all those who would like to see it. Once we had been graced with his approval, it then took 3.5 days to shoot more than 80 photos, completing all of the basic movements of his Taiji boxing solo set. During the shooting, we repeatedly discussed the directions the movements are facing, so that the reader would be able to get a clearer idea of how the movements are actually supposed to be done. Truly, they are precious photographs.
Nice.
Yeah, I have to admit, they're a pretty damn nice set of photos. They're like high res, nice, background. Like he looks like he's in his full strength, like he's in full power. So I like it. It's his book is especially cool looking of Taiji books.
Well, and again, it's that thing of, at the time, it would be the equivalent now of, if you get a good video of, your grand teacher doing something in 1930 or 1960 or something. And you're like, right. Like that's somehow that,
So one last thing is he's talking about the history of Taiji and, going from the ancient past to modern times. He says, Yang Luchan of Beijing was the one who received the complete teachings. Beyond Yang's own sons, it was taught to Wan Chun, Ling Shan, and Chuan Yueh. Wu Jian is the son of Chuan Yueh.
Right,
so there's the three guys again.
Those three guys again. Yeah.
Wang Chun, Ling Shan, and Chuan Yueh. And I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's probably some guys out there doing that other style. It'd be interesting to see that hard one versus the soft one versus the transforming.
Yeah, I mean, my guess is that there were, branches, but again, they probably all just got folded into some other school at some point. Yeah, it changes, and I think keeping an open mind about these being living arts and not getting too rigid about it is part of what keeps them functional. So you just gotta let your mind open up a bit.
And that's why it's fun to keep the history alive too, because you see yourself as part of that continuum that just keeps going and shifts and changes over time. But it's cool to be part of this tradition.
Yeah, keeps me going.
So moving on to the Taiji Chuan Lun, this treatise of Tai Chi that we've been exploring. So Baihua says we take the translation of the Taiji Chuan Lun to say, after one comprehends the law of force, Jien, his martial arts will become more and more refined, and through further understanding, thinking, and researching and practice, he can gradually reach the state where he can use it freely. So he says, since the above-mentioned method of Jien is different from our usual habit of exerting force, it takes practice before the body can get used to it, and the comprehension becomes clear. Therefore, when practicing Taiji Chuan, do not do it carelessly, but experience it carefully according to the requirements, and gradually master and improve it so that the tool will be handy, and you may do whatever you wish. Going back to that concept that, hey, it's going to take some exploration to get it right. Like, I've often complained to my teachers of like, what, that's not going to work, or being soft, what do you mean by that, or whatever, and sort of complain. And then they would show it to me, and it's not easy. It's counterintuitive a lot of the time. Your natural inclination to shove has to be controlled basically and put something else in its place. And in the process, you're going to lose a lot of matches.
Yeah. And that constant analysis is the best word I can give to it. That, part of it is don't just think you got it, and move on to the next thing. That this is a ongoing thing that you're always going to be confronted with force, and you always have the ability to practice, essentially. I mean, one of the phrases Bruce used to say was, you have a million chances to fuck up, like, don't worry about whether or not you're going to have a chance to practice being off balance, right? Because it's going to happen over and over and over, right? So the thing you want to focus on is, what do you do when it happens, not like trying to stop it from happening, in a sense, right? And like,
yeah, that makes sense.
I think that's kind of where when you start to like let go of your ideas about right and wrong and just look at what you're actually doing, like what not what you think you're supposed to do, but like what is actually happening. And this is where a big part of the comprehending of what you're doing is, you need a partner. You need someone to, help. A teacher is better than a partner, but a partner will help, will get you, a certain degree of feedback that you don't get.
Yeah. I mean, they're both essential, right? You gotta have them.
Well, it's kind of like you need a teacher to tell you what to do, and then you need a partner to work out with and do it with, because a lot of this stuff by yourself, it's doable, but it doesn't click the same way as when you do it for real. Because there's hypothetical, oh, I'm moving someone's hand to the side, and then there's actually putting your hand up and trying to move somebody who's not letting you, essentially, and that's a very different action.
Definitely. So yeah, don't be careless and work on the principles. Originally, the principle of Taiji Chuan was to empty oneself and follow others. But many people mistakenly reject what is near at hand and seek what is far away. This is really what the saying goes. One false step will make a great difference. Those who want to learn Taiji Chuan must analyze it in detail. So he uses a couple different slogans here of, emptying yourself to follow others, but then the mistake of rejecting what's close and seeking what's far away. And finally, one false step will make a great difference, meaning you've got, the more you comprehend the principles at the start, the better. That way you don't go off a long distance going the wrong direction.
Yeah. I mean, again, this is sort of like the less you, tell yourself you're perfect, the better, that I mean, basically it's either goes either way, right? Either you're going to tell yourself, oh, you totally suck and you're never going to do it right, or you tell yourself, oh, you're the best ever. And neither of those is really accurate, right? So the important thing is to kind of always stay, keep that open mind, and that not open mind, but neutral mind about, I'm doing some of it right, and some of it I got to work on.
Right.
Like I said, that's the fun of it. If that doesn't appeal to you, go do something where they give you a trophy when you get to a certain level, and then you move on to the next thing, because you get that dopamine hit, right? You get the shiny medal or whatever it is, and then you learn the next thing, and you get a shiny medal, and then you learn the next thing, and you get a shiny medal, right? Internal martial arts aren't like that. It's like you learn it, you don't get a medal, and then you just have to practice it forever. There's no it's an
endless process. And that's pretty much what he says in his explanation. He says, I want to emphasize it again here. Empty oneself and follows others is to use a method of taking his flexion and extension as my flexion and extension. Rather than passive escapism and taking a detour, rejecting what is near at hand and seeking what is far away, you take a positive way. So you empty yourself purposefully to take over his spot. So he says, this is the so-called one false step will make a great difference. This requirement is that people who learn Tai Chi must perceive from the inside to the outside of their own body, from oneself to the opponent, and distinguish them in detail in order to implement them. So he's saying it's about that analysis and that perception. You must perceive from the inside to the outside of their own body and yourself and your opponent.
Right. So it goes beyond just, it starts with, I got to feel from my Zhongging, my center, all the way out to my fingies and my toes. Right. And then I have to, when something touches me, extend that sense of feeling from my fingies and my toes all the way through that thing that's touching me. Right. And that takes a bit of, your mind has to do that part. You
right. Those are both have to be carefully analyzed.
You can, it's like feeling pressure move through something is a very, it's palpation skills, like you learn how to put your hand on, like when you put your hand on your chest and you first don't feel your heartbeat, but if you leave it there for a second, you start to feel your heartbeat.
Okay.
Right. You leave it there long enough, you can start to feel your back, your the between your shoulder blades, and then you can feel down your body. And it's just sort of that proprioception of being able to feel in your own body has to extend to feeling into someone else's body. Same way you do if you do body work or something like that. But that's a challenging skill. This is that idea that when you practice by yourself, right? You want that conscious feeling of everything you're doing and that feedback and all of that, right? So it's sort of like there's something there, right? But then when you're actually doing it with something coming at you, you practice like there's nothing there, and it's just you're just doing your form agile and lightly, and it just almost
you're light and nimble.
Yeah, and you just sort of let the Tai Chi do the work.
Tai Chi just gives you that space to like revel in it and experience it and feel it deeply, and that's pretty freaking awesome.
Yeah, it's that dual purpose essentially, right? It's that's what Tai Chi means in a sense, right? It's like you're doing both. It's not about a yang thing, which would be just the purely martial part about it. And it's not a yin thing, which would just be the purely health part about it. It's about finding a balance down the middle between those two things.
Supporting each other and informing each other.
Yeah.
And it's the yang and the yin are, driving each other, like as he said earlier.
Yeah, it's a really, it's a great thing if you can if you got the patience for it.
Pretty badass. So let's catch up again soon.
All right, get back to work.
Bro. All right. See ya.
Hey, folks, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to check out our Instagram for images to go along with the episodes. We also have a Facebook group, which you can join. And I also just started a private Facebook group for my own training stuff. So if you want to see videos of me doing things and talking about stuff and ranting about things, you can check that out. It's Water Tradition Internal Arts. Again, thanks for listening. Thanks for all your support, and take care of yourselves.